Have everyone's attention, please. A warm welcome, yes? Please come inside, join us here. If you want to listen to child labor, that's the place, or not so child labor. Thank you very much for finding your way up here with help, most of you, I guess. This room is a bit of a throwback into high school, at least for me, with the design and setup of it. But I hope we're going to make it work. I'm going to try to make it a bit less high schooly. Yes, thank you very much for joining us here. I think we're expecting one or two more people who are just going to sneak in later. But I think overall that's going to be a rather small round compared to the others, at least. But I think we're going to have quite a lot of advantages that we can take from that. Because it's going to allow us to be a bit more of a familiar atmosphere for discussions. So let's make the best out of it. One technicality: is there anyone in here who does not understand English well? Perfect. That gives us one less.
Maybe you should ask the question in another language.
You should ask in French, no?
Y a-t-il des gens qui sont beaucoup plus confortables en français qu'en anglais? C'est très bien.
Thank you very much, Megan. Yes, perfect. No, because that does indeed give us one less thing to deal with. I see loads of unfamiliar faces for me, which is amazing, because usually I get to moderate the ISCO working group child labor together with Megan and Monica, the two co-leads who are by my side for this. Perfect. You were, yeah, perfect. That would be. Thanks a lot. Usually I get to be in those surroundings, but having other faces here, let's maybe see, who of you usually joins the ISCO Working Group Child Labour meetings? Maybe just raise your hands. Oh, okay. I hope to see all the rest of you in the next meeting in November, 3rd of November. You can put that down already. No, but it's amazing because it's going to make it a lot of a spillover effect, and hopefully having a lot of more new input from your side. We've had a deep dive into living income in the session before, and we heard that we need to work more closely together. We heard that we need to align. We heard that we need to change something in the price for cocoa if we want to actually have an impact on child labor. And this session is actually going to be an opportunity for all of us to look at how strategies to increase income can at the same time try to reduce child labor. Because I think, and that's actually something that really stuck to me, Abu during the opening panel told the story about the farmer who had to choose between either investing into his farm and being able to make a living, or either choosing to send his kids to school. And that's no decision anyone should have to make. So let's try to find solutions to that, who tackle both things and make people do both things at the same time. So in this session, I'm accompanied by 3 people who have volunteered, more or less so, to share their insights on projects. On the one hand, we have Anne van der Ven, who actually offered to give insights on the En Route project in Côte d'Ivoire from ETG Beyond Beans. We have Emanuele Biraghi from UNICEF, who's going to give especially an insight on the latest UNICEF ILO study. And we do have Megan Passy from ICI, who's going to give insights into the Ghana project on tackling child labor with cash transfers. I'm going to have to look at this paper to give you a proper background of the people, because I'm going to spare you the possibility. I'm really sorry to introduce yourselves, but I think that's going to just take a bit too long if we go through everyone. But I do think it could be nice for everyone to just know a bit of a background on the panelists. So Anne is a global programs lead at ETG Beyond Beans in the Netherlands. And after working in project management and sustainable coffee in Ethiopia, she started in cocoa over 5 years ago. And she was based in Côte d'Ivoire for 2 years for Beyond Beans, working with co-ops, NGOs. They own field teams to implement activities for the farmers. And now she's overseeing all the innovation, scaling programs for farmer livelihoods, agroforestry, forest protection, and community development implemented by your team of Beyond Beans. And in her own words, her specific interest goes into holistic interventions that help farmers get out of poverty, which the En Route project is gonna give us an insight to how to achieve that. Emanuele Biraghi, after a bachelor's degree in economics and business management and a master's degree in marketing and sales, he consolidated his professional experience in the fields of project management, marketing, and partnerships with a number of companies in Switzerland, Italy, and Spain. And being with UNICEF Côte d'Ivoire since 2017, he's in the lead for partnerships with public and private actors. And a key aspect of this role is working with the public and private sector to reduce potential negative impacts in value chains. And he has been able to gain a lot of insights into the fight against child labor and cocoa farming as well over the last years. And last but not least, Megan Passey, Head of Knowledge and Learning at International Cocoa Initiative, a multi-stakeholder partnership to support the elimination of child labor and forced labor in cocoa. Megan describes herself as an advocate for evidence-based decision-making in challenging contexts and has designed and implemented operational research to inform humanitarian response and development programs in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. So quite the expert sitting here with us, and I'm sure a lot of more experts in the group here in front of us. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sophie. I'm with the team of the Swiss Platform for Sustainable Cocoa, and with Megan and Monica, as I said before, co-leading the working group to tackle child labor issues with the ISCOs. Thank you for the three of you for being here. Thank you for being here with us. And honestly, without further ado, let's just try to dive into the topic because as always, you know, time management, more or less accurate. Exactly. So you see that we have an interactive panel discussion. Interactive, what does that mean exactly? So I'm going to be the one asking questions to the panelists, trying to, you know, tell a story about all the experience that we have here. But if you do have questions that fit in the context, please just raise your hand and I'll try to see that hand and I'll take your question directly, because I think sometimes that just makes a lot more sense than like waiting until everything is over. Otherwise, if it's more of a general question or if it's a point that you want to discuss with the whole group, just wait with it until after the panel discussion and we'll have a time for a bit of a Q&A. And then afterwards, I would like to get your input on a question. And especially I would like, because we've heard a lot about it today as well, putting learnings and commitment into actual action. And we, the ISCO secretariats, are here trying to have that convening role, trying to make learnings translate into action. So we want to know from you, how can we actually support you, our signatories, with that? That's going to be the closing part for today. Yes, Emanuele, and I'm actually going to take a seat for that, so I'm not that far removed from you all. Emanuele is going to help me set the scene for this whole thing and to actually recap what exactly do we know about the whole child labor income connection and what do we maybe not yet know at all. So Emanuele, earlier this year, UNICEF and ILO released a study or report on the role of social protection in the elimination of child labor. What exactly is meant by social protection, and how is this report relevant to discussion about child labor and income?
Thanks for the question. And apologies if I keep my laptop in front of me, but I often talk about these topics in French, so there are some technical terms that I'd like to be able to check in English. So I think when we briefed for this session, we thought that the aspect of social protection is somehow not so known, or at least not so present in the debate around cocoa sustainability and child labor. So we thought it could have been a good occasion to put some elements on the table. In general, on why that is important, it is actually part of the overall living income, or it can be overall part of the overall living income equation, in terms of looking a bit more in depth of what gets into farmers' pockets, but also outside farmer pockets. And what we define as social protection, like by the book, is a set of policies and programs designed to prevent So there is an element of prevention and protect the entire population from poverty, precariousness, and social exclusion throughout the life. So that's another important element. So being a bit more practical, by social protection, we mean you most likely have heard cash transfers as one of the key interventions that can effectively address child labor, but also a number of different policies like social health protection, old age pensions, unemployment benefits, care and family-friendly policies like maternity leaves or paternity leaves, disability protection. So all this set of interventions actually are proven, and the data and the comments I will be making throughout the presentation are based on a quite thorough study that have been done by UNICEF and ILO, reviewing more than 60 studies across the globe where these policies have been implemented. So I guess that's pretty much where we are starting from.
Perfect, thank you very much. And what does evidence actually say about the impact of social protection on child labor?
I think that overall there is a clear output, which means social protection measures can reduce child labor and do reduce child labor. However, there are nuances in the sense that the way such measures are designed, and surely we'll hear also again from my colleagues here, can make a difference. Meaning, in some cases, there might be unintended consequences, eventually driving more child labor. There are specific parameters that are suggested in terms of making programs more effective, but all in all, there is unanimous consensus around the role that these measures have in the fight to child labor.
And I do indeed think, Megan, that you're going to build on that. ICI and Nestle have completed a pilot project, which many of you, I'm sure, have heard of, regarding social protection. You focused on cash transfers in Ghana. How come you decided to go with that type of intervention? And as well, maybe during the design and implementation of the program, how did you tackle the issue that the increase of income should not increase at the same time child labor?
Great question. So cash transfers are increasingly popular as a type of intervention for many of us living in Europe, in terms of benefits that we would receive, but also in humanitarian contexts and also in development contexts. And the idea is that rather than spending a lot of time and money finding who we should buy school kits from, delivering school kits, and then distributing school kits, maybe the people who we would distribute the school kits to might have other ideas about what they would like to spend some additional income on. And that if we were to give directly, they could make those decisions and prioritize what's important for them. So cash transfers are seen as being quite efficient, because of course we cut a lot of procurement steps and people have the decision around how they spend it. But also because there's a lot of evidence to show that, as Emanuele said, cash transfers, which are one type of social protection intervention, can be effective in reducing child labor, which is fantastic. What we also see, as Emanuele also mentioned, is that whenever households have the opportunity to invest in productivity, there's also a risk, which means that if you suddenly receive some money and you have a farm, it can be easy to think of buying seeds, buying machinery, buying fertilizer, buying pesticides, thinking in a long-term sense about how to increase your income from your business or from your farm. But of course, often when you invest in productivity, more labor is needed. And as we know, one of the challenges is that families don't often have access to affordable adult labor, and this is one of the situations in which children end up being asked to help. So in the child labor case, we do need to be a little bit careful that when we focus on productivity, when we want people to be able to invest in businesses, and of course the choice is theirs, that we also combat this risk of making sure that children don't get brought in to fill in a labor gap that wouldn't have been there before. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And maybe over to you. And Beyond Beans en route project in Côte d'Ivoire has or will start piloting strategies, but not only focusing on one type of intervention, but on several types of interventions aimed at increasing income and reducing child labor at the same time. What are those interventions, and why did you choose those interventions?
Yes, well, first of all, thanks for having me and nice to see you all. Indeed, two strategies, because we also heard this morning, debate is very much still going on. Should we pay a higher price so that there's more cash, or should we come in with extension services or other services approach? And we wanted to be part of the debate by actually just executing both. So one strategy and one group of farmers in this pilot will get cash, and another group will get a service package with a smart mix of solutions that help address living income. And then a third group gets both combined, but is of course twice as expensive. So actually what we want to do here is see different interventions set apart and really see how they contribute one, to closing the living income gap, but also how they help reduce child labor. And then by actually comparing that, we can see what is the merit of each. Ultimately, we don't necessarily believe that one or both will be the solution, but that there should be a combined package that addresses it. Then in the question, how do you design then such a program? What interventions are you going to do? Well, firstly, it was not us as E2G Beyond Beans necessarily. Actually, our donor is here as well. We work with the Dutch government. We also work with Oxfam Novit and KITS, the Rural Tropical Institute, and we had discussions together as well as with farmers and the cooperatives to design this. And firstly, what is important in designing this cross-section of child labor and living income is that we saw we don't need to address the farmer, we need to address the household. So the household perspective was very clear to us. And when designing the cash package, we decided, well, we will split the cash. We'll not give everything to the farmer, which usually happens in premiums, but we'll give 50% of the husband, 50% to the woman. And then most often, of course, the farmer is a man. That is, in the context, unfortunately, true. So in this set, it's split. Then the second element, we are actually now in the stage of the project where we have done the inception and the baseline, but we haven't actually implemented it yet. So not many results, but what I can say on the baseline that we did is that we saw that there is a clear link between child labor and the living income gap, also confirmed by other research. And we noticed that it's also due to the need for labor. So in designing a service package, we thought, what are those factors in the family or on the plantation where labor is needed and now not available? So a bit like Megan was actually touching upon, those good agricultural practices that need to be executed, can we bring in a labor group that does that, but then gets paid to do that, so then they're not using the children. So that's one of these services. Also, one is on a household level where water can be far away or children can carry wood for cooking. So we're also organizing something on the household that actually reduces the need for labor. So the service package is, as I mentioned, a holistic package, but addressing all those different ways. So yes, household in the center and making sure that less labor is needed from the children are the clear lessons for us in designing those packages.
Just a brief follow-up question on that, actually, directly before going back to Emanuele. We're talking about the future, right? Piloting soon to be piloted. Like, when exactly what's the timeline for this, and when can we expect results from this? Because it does seem like a very interesting finding potentially from your experiences.
Yeah. We're all sort of very ready to have those results anxiously. So we'll start in September, October actually. So it's not so far away, but we want to do it for 2 years to fully see the services materialize on the ground and have 2 years of cash distribution. So then end of 2024 we'll see the actual results. But soon, surely we will tune in somewhere down the road.
Perfect. So maybe in time for the next ISCOnference.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, Emanuele, the joint UNICEF-ILO report provides recommendations for how to best design programs to include social protection and especially child protection issues. What exactly do those recommendations say?
So, starting from the fact that I'm trying to synthesize a 70-page report that analyzed 60 reports in 2 minutes, and the moderator didn't have confidence in my capacity to stick to the time. I'll do my best to just put some points, and then we take it from there. Also, little intro. Most of the things we're analyzing tend to have a public policy angle. Nonetheless, these considerations still make sense also for private actors and civil society, because are principles that apply actually even to actions that can be implemented differently. But so, all in all, from a public policy standpoint, one clear thing was the reach, obviously, of social protection measures, but also the quality, and a combination of them is the recipe to success. There is no one program that alone has the capacity to address all the issues. There are more evidences on cash transfers, because there were an abundance of studies that have been reviewed, and probably key findings refer to the conditionality. I'm sure that we often heard the question, like, should we put conditionalities or not? But if we give cash without conditions, then will they use actually the cash in the best interest of children? Actually, evidences seems to be saying that there is no specific need for conditionalities. On the contrary, when conditionalities are too strong or too binding, the transactional costs that are required to monitor the compliance with such conditions kind of offset the benefits of the transfer themselves. So the overall direction that is set is probably towards either unconditional cash transfers plus, and when the plus is some awareness raising messaging, or soft conditionalities. So just to kind of reiterate priorities, because it has been proven that whenever such interventions were not just focusing on child labor but on other outcomes like education, they were more effective. Sometimes, as it has been said, conditions turned out being counterproductive. There was a case where children were asked to be enrolled in school, but since school was not completely free, in order to pay for kids and the rest, children ended up working to pay for the extra cost to still be enrolled in school, to still receive the cash transfer. So a bit of a perverse mechanism, but all this to say that it's a promising direction, or just unconditional plus and reinforcing intervention. Size, duration and regularity are key parameters for cash transfer, so adequate amount of money, but also the element of predictability and continuity as a clear correlation with the capacity of reducing child labor, particularly hazardous labor. Measures like school feeding, for instance, like the cantine scolaire or this type of interventions also do have a meaningful impact on school enrollment and attendance, therefore potentially increasing chances to reduce child labor, but there were less studies in that sense. Unemployment benefit also are an interesting strategy, particularly to avoid coping strategy. When we say coping strategies, whenever children are used to cope with external shocks or issues. And obviously, service access and quality is paramount, because we can talk a bit more later on when we talk about what's happening on the ground and what companies can do. But an health insurance or universal health insurance in the context where health services are non-existing is just a piece of plastic in the pocket of the foreigner, so it doesn't do much. And similarly, education allowances in schools are not there, and the quality of teaching is not there. So I think that part is still critical. And also, last point, still in the same area of coping strategy, is the health insurance and overall care social protection measures that we can expand a bit more.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Alad, I would like to put you on the spot and actually ask you 4 keywords. What is needed for effective measures? 4 keywords, but maybe you can think about those 4 keywords to summarize what you said for the next question before I ask you. Or do you have those keywords ad hoc in mind?
I said service. Or start from the beginning. Quality and reach.
Yeah.
because otherwise you don't shoot enough. Unconditional plus targeting messages.
Yeah.
And then particularly for cash transfer, size, duration, and regularity plus services, service quality, availability.
Yeah, thank you. Megan, in Ghana, there is already a social protection scheme system in place called LEAP. And maybe when answering the question, you can just briefly touch upon what that actually is for those who don't know the Ghanaian context too well. Why did you choose to create a different system to transfer cash to families other than just integrating your measures into that sort of national-led system? And how will you ensure long-term sustainability of the result of your pilot project?
Should I talk about what the results were first? Okay. So it's true, the original plan of the project was to say, okay, we'd like to do cash transfers. Nobody at that time had actually tested rigorously what the impact of giving cash transfers in a cocoa growing context in West Africa was. So there was zero as vulnerable. There were a couple of challenges, and we found out these challenges when we talked in several different sessions with the LEAP team and with other government departments. And we said, hey, can we deliver money through your system? We'd really like to do so. And they said, yeah, well, it's going to be a bit more complicated than you think, because obviously, A, we have targeting criteria. Our cash transfer program is intended for the extreme poor. And hang on, let's look at your cocoa farmers. I'm sorry, but they don't qualify as the extreme poor. All of the cocoa farmers in the cooperatives that we intended to target were too rich and not vulnerable enough to qualify for the national program. And this is a challenge. So obviously we can't change the targeting criteria for a couple of areas of a national program. It doesn't make sense. And then they said also, how much were you thinking of giving? And we said, well, we looked at the evidence and we saw that an income increase of, at least 10% is likely to have the kind of effects that we see. We see that when the amount is not enough, it doesn't end up making a big enough difference, because you need to have quite a significant increase in incomes to be able to see an impact. And they said, yeah, well, sorry again, you were planning on giving this much, but we only give a fraction of what you were hoping to give in the context of this project. So thanks for contacting us. We can tell you about things that work, but you'd be far better off doing this alone, especially as it's a pilot. And so we did. The impact of that was great. So we only did a 6-month transfer. So we split randomly the households into 2 groups. We gave the first group cash transfers for 6 months, approximately €30 a month per household. And that amount was adjusted based on the number of children. So households with more children who were older got a little bit more money than households with fewer children who were younger. And then at the end of that 6 months, we did a second survey. So we compared the households that had received it with the households that haven't. And then we gave also the same amount to a second wave of households. So everybody received it in the end, but we had this opportunity to compare what the cash had done for the households that received it with the households who hadn't yet. And what we saw was really interesting, and it speaks directly to your point on coping strategies and resilience, which was that during the period of the cash transfer, it had been pretty tough for more than half of the households in that sample. So we asked them about whether or not, in response to a shock, an unexpected event, illness, death in the family, poorer harvest than expected, things like this, they'd had to reduce the amount of meals that they were eating. And over half of that sample said yes. So they were so much struggling to cope that they had to reduce what they were consuming on a daily basis. And we also saw that the households that received the cash were more resilient to those shocks than the households that didn't. So among the group that received the cash transfer, child labour dropped by 16%. Certainly didn't eliminate it completely, but it was quite a significant increase compared to the households that didn't receive that cash transfer, where it was pretty much the same as before. So it did have the right effect. Did I answer your question? You did. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Yes, you did indeed. Anne, it's too early to talk about any impacts of your project yet, but have you had any learnings so far during the design? And if so, what were those learnings?
Yes, there is definitely some learning. So as I said, we did the baseline study. We effectively saw that the living income gap is very big in our group. So we actually selected all new farmers to us. So really to see that if we haven't done an intervention, what will be the result? So that baseline is that only 7% is currently now reaching the benchmark, and the average farmer is below 50%, just below 50% of the benchmark. So a huge gap, which is in line with a lot of different research. I didn't say, but this project is in Côte d'Ivoire. It's in Daloa and Mans, so in the border level, very much affected also by climate change, which also can see an effect here. And we also saw from this the study high rates of child labor. So we don't have the outcome of the different packages, cash versus service versus the combined. Very happy to hear some very promising results from ICI. So hope that we can build on that too when we see our results. But what we do have is, and I also want to emphasize that a lot came up today that there is pilots, but you have to scale ultimately, and I believe in that too. We did in the past already design some interventions around child labor and increasing income. And that was around visa-lays, very familiar concept, but also bundling that with couples dialogues, gender trainings on starting new income activities, on child protection. So that's also something that we designed through a pilot. 20 groups at the time, I believe, very small, and now we have been able to scale that to over 300, 350 now, in the next years, another 300. So that's getting very big, very rapidly. So that's also to say that sometimes you have to start with a pilot to be able to grow. And from those visa-lays, which are actually also a core part of our service. So our service package start with a visa-lay by taking farmer households together, have them save together and create a platform of trust, but also a platform for learning. And in that platform, there's on a weekly basis, there's money that's collected and saved and can be taken out as a loan. That is part of the concept, but there's also this exercise where they develop a household plan, a vision. What do we want? What do we want to invest on our cocoa? What do we want to do as another income generating activity? When do we want to save for education? And ask all of those questions and make a joint plan in that. And we actually saw from evidence as well that firstly, all of those groups that we have, the visa-lay, the retention is 99%, so very little farmers or members want to get out of a visa-lay once they start it. They save per year over €100, and that is also not an extra income because it's savings, but it gives some resilience, of course, to shocks. And they take out loans of 117 euro on average, which they invest for 30% into education and childcare to prevent child labor. So these are all things that actually link and that prove us that this intervention, and it's a foundational intervention in our broader service package, are actually quite impactful. And we're very curious to see how combining visa-lays with those trainings and the labor groups and the household protection around cooking and water, how that together can, of course, have more impact. But that's to hear later.
To be heard about more in latest 2 years and hopefully in between from a progress report. Emanuele, strengthening national social protection systems seems like, at least to me, the obvious choice to do because there are some systems in place and why not use them? In Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, there are, in theory, those national social protection schemes. But what is the hindering factor of actually engaging more in them? What hinders all sorts of stakeholders to jump onto that train?
I love this question, and I would be happy if actually after we have these questions to have a bit of a more open discussion around those role that companies and other actors can play. I think it's, as Megan started answering this question, we are talking about countries that are in the process of becoming developing countries, so the reality is way different from what we are living here. And when it comes to the percentage of people in poverty, it's actually extremely high. I think data from 2016 in Côte d'Ivoire said that it was more than 46. If you go in rural areas, more than 56. So if you had to address all people that are actually in needs, the investment required are huge. So there is a cost barrier, simply speaking. there is also this access barrier, I would say, because also to access a certain number of services, you need to have an identity. We know also that often births are not registered. There has been, there is freedom of movement in the ECOWAS area. So again, who's entitled to receive such assistance and at the expenses of whom? It's another discussion. The presence of functioning social services is key, because it's true that we keep referring to social protection and we think instinctively at cash transfers, but that's not only that. There is, for instance, big priorities in Côte d'Ivoire are l'assurance maladie universelle, ce qu'ils appellent la CMU, or the régime des travailleurs indépendants, which are like specific mechanisms stimulating individual contribution from farmers to build an insurance vis-à-vis health issues or pensions or shocks. So, as I was saying before, if the services that need to provide you assistance when you're in need are not functioning, then it loses attractiveness. And also there is a certain reluctance from the population, which is somehow due to the non-familiarity and the non-financial savviness. Let's also be frank, cocoa is a rather seasonal crop. That idea of saving is not so spread, and actually VSLAs contribute significantly to build that awareness. So the idea of a cotization, like put inside every month little by little, people say, well, you know what, I'm sure of my present, I'm not sure of tomorrow. And so there is a bit of less of culture in that sense, but it's also due to the fact that there are sometimes also some opportunistic behaviors also in those that are meant to provide services. So if you go to a pharmacy and they say, no, but we don't take your insurance, then again, it's a barrier. People say, well, I don't cotize anymore. So I think there is a mix of elements in that sense. But one key statement that I think it's important reminding that the study was mentioning is you don't build social protection systems after you develop as a country. Actually, it's almost the other way around. You integrate the implementation of such systems in the development process of a country. So, and this is quite important to be kept in mind.
Thanks. Brief question to you. How many industry representatives do we have in this room? Just maybe raise your hands. That is quite some. Okay, Megan. What would you say to those representatives? Should they roll out the same system, the same project that you did with unconditional cash transfers? Is that something you'd recommend to industry? Should the whole sector just roll out those kind of projects? And if so, what should they keep in mind when doing so?
I would say based on the evidence we have, it can be an effective way of reducing child labour. It can be an effective way of improving households' resilience to shocks. And of course, one of the biggest challenges in the cocoa sector more generally is that as a producer, your income is seasonal. There's one time of year where you have a lot of income and there are other times of year where you have very little. So separating some of the benefits that come even from a company that's ultimately paying and giving that in a different way so that it comes as a regular amount every month rather than all at once at harvest time can be interesting in a situation where resilience is not necessarily very high. So it's definitely something to consider, and it's been shown to be effective.
Thank you. And looking at time, I'm going to have to keep it a bit shorter myself, and also going to have to ask you to keep it really precise. Anne, a lot of effort has gone into designing and implementing the programs you describe in Côte d'Ivoire. Why focus on activities like cash transfers, income-generating activities, rather than simply just increasing the price paid to producers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, simply increasing price is maybe not as simple. Of course, big dynamics. But essentially, yes, it was the starting point of our project to pay an increased price. And we wanted to do that in our micro system as a premium to farmers, which is then what isn't within our control since the price is defined by the CCC. But when designing the project, actually we realized, hey, if these vulnerable households actually have a higher chance on labor. And if we then pay a premium based on a volume, those farmers that have very little volume will also get very little cash contributions. So then we're not helping those farmers. So then we changed our view and we said, well, then why don't we go with a fixed unconditional cash transfer, where we give equal opportunity to those farmers that are already doing fine and see what they are going to invest, but also give that equal unconditional payment to farmers in a more vulnerable position. So that's how we actually ended up with that, because of potential impact on child labor.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm actually astonished that you have not invited 100 weeks to this panel to discuss about cash distribution. 100 weeks is working together with Fadi. I don't know whether you people are here.
Do me a favor and just use this so that
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually astonished not to see 100 Weeks and Cargill sitting here in this panel to talk about the cash distribution they're doing together with CARE on VCLAs, giving on a weekly basis out some cash. First, as you said, the VCLA has to be mature, having the use of saving, and then you can start the cash distributions. And the first cycle of the first 2 years is just on the way to be evaluated. I don't have seen yet a report, but there would have been, if prepared for this, also something to look into the different cases and have some learning what worked well in the different approaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can definitely say that we're going to take that up, and the good thing is that we're going to send around notes and also like slides or like brief documents on what has been said by the three panelists. So I'm just going to get onto him maybe to just see if they have any information on that, and maybe I'll get onto you in the process of that as well, because yeah, as you say, the more learnings to share, the better. Very, very good point. Megan, did you want to add anything to the question before on whether or not we should... One second. Why not increase price pay to producers, and why focus on those activities that you're doing?
Price is obviously important, as we've heard this morning. So there's nothing against that. But I think in terms of reducing inequality and potentially supporting the people that need it more than others, there are perhaps more efficient mechanisms to use in addition to price, which can really help the people that are far away from a living income, rather than only focusing on price, which again favours those producers who already have more land, higher productivity. Anna said it all.
Thank you to the two of you. Maybe two last questions. Yes, absolutely, to the panel. But before that, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Marleen Vink. I'm working for the Dutch government fund against child labor. And I'm interested to hear from you, Megan. Why did you choose a period of 6 months for the cash transfers? And was that just a pilot, or do you recommend a period of 6 months? Because it does seem very short when we compare to 100 weeks. Who do it for 100 weeks? I say the name.
Thanks. Excellent question. So the 6-month period was chosen for the duration of the pilot, wanting to be able to have results in a relatively reasonable time frame. But the broader body of evidence, as is outlined really clearly in the ILO-UNICEF report, is that the longer a cash transfer can go on for, the more reliable it is, the better the results. Because really people need to be able to rely on this regular income as a social safety net, rather than it just being a one-off thing. As it happened, the cash transfer was distributed during a time of increased vulnerability due to COVID. So it was quite nice in that sense because people were particularly vulnerable, and it somehow happened at a useful time. But no, the longer and the more continuous, the better.
Does that answer the question, or any follow-up? It's okay. I have one question here in the front, and then I'll give it back to you.
Tim McCoy from the Hershey Company. In the spirit of transparency, I sit on the board of directors for ICI, and so my question is directed toward Megan. Although, Emanuele, your comments about unintended consequences is something of real interest to me, and I want to follow up maybe one-on-one for more information about that. But the question to Megan is, Megan, you said that the cash transfers had resulted in a 16% drop in child labor where they had been done, and I'm thinking about other ICI championed interventions that have been shown to produce an even higher percentage drop in child labor, like CLMRS. So I just the question is, what are your reflections on, you know, the sort of the different percentage drops, and are you seeing these things as potentially working in tandem? So if you get 30% drop with one thing, you add 16% on top of it, so it's a greater impact, or do you see these things operating independently entirely?
If only it were that easy to take an intervention that gave a 10% drop and add it to an intervention that gave a 16% drop and add it to an intervention that gave a 20% drop. Sadly, I don't think it's that simple. But what we do see is that the more comprehensive a package of interventions is, that addresses the various root causes of challenges like child labour, the more likely it is to be effective. It's a very short answer, but yes, I think if you do more than just cash, you can expect bigger impacts, but I wouldn't expect it to add something as simply as that. Do you want to add?
Maybe if I may just a quick comment on the unintended consequences, because there was another aspect which I believe is quite striking, related to in-kind provision of services, benefits, which is still considered among the social protection measures. If there is, and also I heard productivity as one way to increase people's income and address living income. But if we, and Tim, this you know it by heart, but if there is one finding which is striking from the NORC report, is the amount of children exposed to pesticides, agrochemicals, which skyrocketed, literally increasing by 500% over 10 years. So I think that this type of findings should also make us reflect a little bit on what has been somehow presented as a solution, like driving productivity by inputs, fertilizer, and so on, and perhaps rethink a little bit how that is implemented, not forgetting that farmers are probably the most important factor in the productivity equation, whereas most of the interventions that have been implemented in the context of sustainability intervention tend to focus on trees and land. So in that sense, as Megan flagged it before as well, also when we drive productivity and production in a labor-intensive crop with price which doesn't pick up due to the demand that doesn't pick up, not surprisingly, child labor goes up again. So in that sense, everything related to social health, protection measures, taking better into account illnesses, productivity of farmers could actually be very interesting strategies to kill at least 2 or 3 birds with one stone, namely productivity, income, and child labor. So these are kind of the unintended consequences piece.
Thank you. My name is Abdullah Aliu. I work with Ricolto. I'm based in Ghana. I have 2 questions. The first question is, for instance, if you go to a cocoa growing community, you have a cocoa farmer who has his name in the register, but you have a caretaker who lives in the farm. He has children, the cocoa farmer also has children. So with this type of intervention, I'm wondering, how did you select the beneficiaries of these interventions? The second question I have is, what was the role of farmers in designing the interventions? Because you mentioned at the beginning that instead of investing in input and water fuel, it's better you give the cash direct to the farmer. I'm just wondering, what was the role of the farmers in coming to these conclusions? If they did not play any role, then we stand a chance of facing the same problems we have been facing, where interventions are designed without taking into consideration the farmer's perspective. We implement it, they will come because, of course, it's something that is being brought new into the community. Once we leave with our intervention and we come back to the same discussions. Thank you.
Excellent questions, thank you. In terms of the caretaker farmers, this is a really important issue, and increasingly, which I think is a very positive development, farmer registers, which previously would only include the registered farmer, even if in reality somebody else with their own family was actually managing the farm, would often be excluded from a lot of sustainability programs. So they wouldn't be monitored as part of child labour monitoring and remediation systems. They wouldn't necessarily receive sustainability payments and benefits because they're receiving a proportion of the total price, but that's it. And for this project, indeed, because we consulted with the farmers and the decision was made by people within those cooperatives to say, no, we think it's important to give the transfer to the registered farmer only, not the caretaker. That's the decision that was taken in this pilot. But I would say that trend is changing more generally, and certainly in part of normal efforts that we do for child labour monitoring and remediation, caretakers are now systematically included so that we don't have that challenge in the future, because clearly, yeah, they should be, they're part of it, and we can't forget them, even if they're not on the official list. In terms of the design of the programme, I mentioned it already, but we did do quite a lot of consultation with the people living in those communities to say, okay, this is the plan, what do you think would be most effective? What are some of the challenges of, for example, receiving mobile money? Should it be vouchers? Should it be something else? Should it be direct cash? And that, yeah, helped us, with their input, make some key decisions about how often, how much, when. So it was a very useful discussion. But interestingly, some of the things that we were told during the consultations were contradictory to some of the broader evidence on impact. So, for example, many of the people we consulted within those communities were pro-conditionality. We said, if there are conditions, the evidence shows that it's just as effective, but it's less expensive to implement because you don't spend a lot of money monitoring what happens and monitoring that people comply with conditions. Therefore, if we don't do conditions, there's more cash to go around, which means more money for everybody for a longer period. They said, no, but you have to have conditions. If the aim is to reduce child labour, there should be no child labour, and we should check up on people that there's no child labour, otherwise we won't do it. So, you know, there was a debate, and there were several decisions based on things that we were told, where we said, okay, fine, let's give it a try. Another interesting point is that the evidence is a little bit more balanced on this, but there's quite a lot of evidence that if you give cash transfers to women rather than men, the spending patterns are different, and the prioritisation of what is spent is different. The cooperatives that we were working with in the context of this pilot were adamant that it went to the registered farmer, who was in the vast majority of cases a man. So we went with that, but we're in the process of putting together a second pilot where we're going to give half the transfers deliberately to women and half the transfers deliberately to men, and to see if there's any difference in impact, because we think that it's worth testing and it would be interesting to see. So yes, consultation happened. Not in every case did we go with the most popular idea, and there was quite a lot of debate, but it was a really useful exercise.
I'm just going to stay here, and I have one more question, and then I'll allow for more questions from you. But regarding the government role and systems from the government, we now heard that the collaboration between government and private sector is crucial in order to achieve like a long-term sustainable impact in actually fighting child labor. You know, like moving, like not having parallel systems, but being able to include it into national social protection systems, etc. And maybe like, I'm not going to even address it to either one of you, but what role do cocoa and chocolate companies play in this context? What can they play, and what have we learned from the past? Which mistakes should we maybe not repeat, and how do we move on in the future of how to integrate the two systems into each other? How do we go on about that? And whoever wants to answer first, go ahead, and then please just...
Maybe just initial consideration. I think that it would be really important to start from what exists. For how suboptimal, improvable it might look, if there are protection schemes in place, it took years, laws, debate. So I think we need to be aware of not taking the risk of being naive in implementing things and then turning the head towards the government and hoping that they pick them up and they put them scale, because that's just not the way a government works. Particularly in a context where poverty is so widespread, you might create almost inequality, or it's financially impossible to scale up certain things. So my recommendation would be starting from things that are clearly a priority for the government in the national country. I can speak better about Côte d'Ivoire because that's where I live, but the universal health coverage and this social regimen for self-employed workers are two clear priorities for the Ministry of Employment. So in that sense, companies could, with no cost, promote the adoption of such tools within their supply chain and cooperatives. With some more cost, could support financially part of the contributions that farmers need to pay on a monthly basis. So to have a sort of, I don't know, spread cost between the two. And also to establish the habit, to kind of break that reluctance that is today. They can also direct their sustainability investments within the communities where they're working towards the strengthening of services, because we said it before, health facilities, education facilities are key to make them more relevant. And in general, contribute to the advocacy towards the government to make such services available, both in terms of infrastructure, but also social protection mechanisms. All the discussions we're having that, in my view, are a bit kind of frontal clashes on price, lead, LID, and all the rest. I mean, somebody could even say, within the conditions or the things that we would like to say vis-a-vis increased premiums, we would like to make sure that in these regions or these social protection mechanisms are further scaled up. Or I think that price risks to be sometimes one win-lose territory for negotiation, whereas if other interventions like social protections one could be kept a bit more to the table, may actually offer win-win situations where you drive the agenda of sustainability and development of a country, but at the same time you reduce socioeconomic vulnerability of companies.
Yeah, anyone who wants to add maybe 2 minutes in order to then move on? Sorry for pressuring here.
All right. Well, I'll definitely keep it brief. I think in our case, in the design, we did not necessarily so much include the governments, but rather the farmers and other parties. Definitely worthwhile, you know, in the implementing phase to have the whole local governments, authorities being there. That's always our common practice. And you know, it's well worth thinking, where's the balancing act? Do you want to first design together with the governments, as Emanuele is saying as well, basing on their systems, or do you want to show that something works first before going there? And that's, yeah, in my mind was also a reflection on the ISCOs, right? Where can the ISCOs play a role in sort of bundling from those pilots? Maybe, you know, if you have tech startups, 90% fails. Maybe in pilots also 90% might not be the holy grail, but maybe some are really the things that can be put at scale, and can we put that together as ISCOs and make sure that there's a channel towards the public sector? I think that's a very, that can be something, and I'm also, of course, interested in the rest of the room, all the other partners, how you think of that. But let me pass it on to Megan first.
Then I'll be very brief. I think, first of all, communication. Explaining what the other is doing, maintaining an open dialogue, first of all with local authorities in the areas where cocoa and chocolate companies are planning on doing things, have already done things, are continuing to do things. It's obviously really important to explain what's going on and understand what those priorities are. Strengthening national and local services wherever possible. You know, if you're setting up a bridging class, follow the national curriculum, use government teachers, follow the right training material that already exists when it does. All of this is totally doable. when it comes to challenging or channeling your own small project through a national social protection system, as we failed to do for very good reason in the Ghana example. Clearly it wasn't the right way to be going about that, but I think there is a very important role that industry can have in terms of collaborating and working closely, sharing information, sharing data in a way that can strengthen in a sustainable way the national systems that do exist.
Any good practice examples here in the room? Alignment with government on child labor and national protection, social protection systems? No? Well, that's something to work on. No, you?
Not so quick.
Okay, do you want to go ahead?
Give us some time to reflect. I mean, I think there's a number of examples of where government, I really appreciated these last comments here, and I think the importance of communication. Some of the things Emanuele was saying about the role that the private sector can play at virtually no cost in promoting government schemes and encouraging farming families to make contributions. I mean, as Megan said, it requires a two-way stream of communication, and you can't take it for granted that happens. I mean, Emanuele was sharing some things I hadn't heard before, and I feel like I've got a pretty good, line of sight into things going on in Côte d'Ivoire. So that's a super important consideration. But I think about the private sector providing data upon request into national systems like SOSTECI in Côte d'Ivoire, the government mechanism for child labor monitoring. That's just one example that I can think of where there is collaboration, cooperation. The same thing happens in Ghana, where the Ministry of I think Employment and Labor Relations regularly requests data on industry activities to combat child labor. Are these systems perfect, and are our responses perfect? Of course not, but there is at least that collaboration, and we can build on that.
Thank you. I think there was one more question in the room over there to the panel, if you want to.
I fully understand. I'm your student from Barry Callebaut. I fully understand the choice for unconditional transfers of a fixed amount of money, because you want the money to go to those that need it. Do you see risks of people staying in cocoa because of these transfers, while otherwise they would have left because with half a hectare they don't have an income anyway?
I mean, it's a very good point, but in terms of the money we're talking, 30 euros a month, is that enough to make you stay in cocoa if you have only half a hectare and no other source of income? Don't know. Good provocative question, though.
In general, also when you look at the government schemes, the amount of money provided is so little, but it's at least enough to at least give something, that I generally don't believe that someone would rely on that in order just to make a living out of that. It's really just a little top up to at least give some buffer to cope with shocks. But I don't believe it should retain people independence.
Do you have an opinion?
It's a question.
We looked in this.
You want to take the mic, otherwise we won't have that.
We looked in this, and we don't have the report, but those who are not moving, while we do the regular payments with 100 weeks, we look who is really increasing the business, who is really doing an income diversification. Those who are going for other activities, and there are others who are not moving. And for those who are not moving, who are not looking for another income generating activities, we strongly are suspicious that we keep them in the system which is not profitable, and that we do not make them realizing that they're in an income generating activity which is not sustainable. We have strongly, but it's not the majority, it's a certain percentage, and I don't recall the figures. I have seen this, but I don't. So to say, there is a group which can be in this, but this group is then, after finishing, you will identify them relatively easy and start another program with them to discuss.
Do you want to comment? I had another question. But do you want to comment on that? No?
No.
Okay.
We were
No,
just saying
okay.
it depends eventually on the amount of money which is given, obviously.
Okay. Actually, I have a micro question on the timing and the permanence. My name is Albéric Potier, so I'm the CSO, the coordinator, for the platform with the 5 ISCOs. Do you have any evidence, or maybe because projects are too young, do you plan to collect any evidence on what happens once cash transfers stop after a given period of time? But I fear there is a risk of non-permanence of these impacts.
Yeah, I think there is a risk of non-permanence of these impacts. I mean, the way that the transfer I described was set up was really to help households with everyday expenses and looking after their kids. Some of the households that received the cash transfer were impressively able to accumulate those relatively small monthly payments and invest them in businesses. There was a woman who started a shop. There was another guy who invested in a business. So there were some interesting examples of people that were able to use that money to generate extra income in a more sustainable way. But as we see for the results, most of the households used it to be able to have food at a point when they didn't have enough meals. So the idea that you might be able to then invest that in a different activity in the longer term is pretty far-fetched. What will be interesting is that as part of the second phase of this project, where I explain we'll be doing cash transfers to women and to men and comparing the differences, we'll be following up some of the same households. So it will indeed be interesting to see how some of the households that were involved in the first wave are faring now and what we'll see there.
What I've been seeing during a recent travel to Ivory Coast is that cash transfers are mostly combined with VSLAs, and sometimes women groups, for example, they start their VSLA group, they start saving with their own money, and then afterwards the cash transfers are added, but then they already have confidence that they can also save without the money given. And when the cash transfers stop, they know we can continue with our own money, and with the cash transfers they were able to set up other businesses. So I think maybe to have more durability, you should combine cash transfers with VSLAs, saving systems. And then I think, the effect will be much longer.
And I think that's being done, though, at least in the ETG Beyond Wien's En route project, right? Like merging that. So I think it's going to be really interesting, actually, in whenever you have first their results, to see exactly that. Like, how has the combination of those two had an impact, maybe beyond the duration of the project?
Yeah, in the sense of having VSLAs established and then increasing the rolling fund of the VSLAs. We used this also while we wanted the VSLA to move in investment. While they, for water smart agriculture, while the VSLA wanted to go for this, they got the fund to the rolling fund of the VSLA, giving them an extra push so that they can then invest in the infrastructure needed for the water smart agriculture, and then improving one by one the farm on this. And then you can imagine this system for farms where they need a push in pruning, they need a push in certain activities which will cost something, having an VSLA and giving then out this credit by the group pressure so that the credit has to be paid back to the other members. So having these payments related to VSLA on a weekly basis for food, on a certain level for food and school, and a certain level for food, school and investment would then be something to work on. What should be the amount of funding to be given as an extra to the VSLA or to the women. And it would be also interesting to see, while you have given the funds to men, and while you have given the funds to men and women, and in 100 weeks the money goes to the women, to the VSLA members. So it would really be interesting to look in these 3 different ways of payment to see what is the impact.
Thank you very much. My heart is bleeding, but it's 1:45, so I'm going to have to cut this here. And truth be told, it was not my plan that we only have this panel discussion and the Q&A, but We had planned to ask you another interactive question. We had asked, and I'm going to actually do that as well, but you can choose if you want to do it or not then on the way out. Because we, as I said before, we would like to have a bit of a feedback on what exactly can we as ISCOs do to support you as our signatories. And maybe if you can just move on to the exactly that one. No, yes, this one. You see a Menti code down there. You can, if you want to, use that one to give us feedback. The issue is if you don't, we're just going to continue with whatever we're doing right now. So maybe those who want to use the opportunity to criticize us or give, constructive criticism, please. But those who want to use the opportunity, please feel free to enter that code on www.mentimeter.com. You're going to be asked to insert a code, and then you can just do that. Feel free to do that now. Officially our time is up, so this is your coffee break. Feel free to not do that if you're happy with whatever we're doing here. And I just want to say a huge thank you to the 3 panelists for sharing their insights, to Monica for taking notes, which are going to be given to you afterwards. You can actually read up on that as well, or share it with colleagues or whatever. And a huge thank you to all of you who have taken the opportunity to give comments as well and to pose questions. And since I saw that the majority of you are not in the ISCO Working Group Child Labour, I want to really encourage you to please come join us there, because those are the questions that we need. And we've all heard that we need to collaborate more, we need to communicate more, we need to share learnings, etc. And I really hope that we're going to take that opportunity, because, it's a cliche and it's cringe, but we're stronger together, and only if taking that opportunity we're going to move somewhere. So that's it. Thank you from my side to all of you. Coffee awaits you downstairs. Feel free to just find your back down the stairs again. And